Sign it, or I will make sure you never work in this province again." My mother-in-law pressed those words into my ear like a knife, while her son stood 2 feet away and said nothing. Seconds before, she had shoved a folder into my chest hard enough to make me stumble backward into the edge of the dining room table in front of her entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. 14 people watched. Nobody moved. I didn't cry. I didn't sign. I set the folder down on the table, straightened my blazer, and walked out the front door into the November cold without my coat. Before I tell you exactly how I froze every account she owned and watched her lose the house she spent 30 years bragging about, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you did for your in-laws that you now wish you had never done? I read every single one. I sat in my car in the driveway with the heat running and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from the cold, from the clarity. Because standing in that dining room, I had finally seen it. Not a misunderstanding, not a bad moment. A system, one that had been running quietly for 4 years. And I had been the fuel. My name is Claire. I am 31 years old. And I am a licensed insolvency trustee in Ontario. My job is to walk into financial disasters, figure out exactly how they happened, and make sure the right people are held accountable. I am very good at it. The irony of what I am about to tell you is not lost on me. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 26. He was warm and funny and completely devoted to his mother in a way I told myself was sweet. His mother, Patricia, ran a real estate staging business out of Oakville. She was polished and sharp and the kind of woman who gives compliments that are actually measurements. His father had passed when Daniel was a teenager, and Patricia had raised him and his younger sister, Renee, alone. I respected that. I respected her. For a long time. We got married in September 3 years ago at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was beautiful. Patricia wore a cream dress that was close enough to white to be a statement. I let it go. I was happy. I was still in the phase where I translated every red flag into a quirk. The first thing I did for my in-laws that I should not have done happened 8 months after the wedding. Patricia came to us with a problem. Her staging business had a cash flow gap between a large invoice she was waiting on and a lease payment she owed on her storage unit. She needed $12,000 for 60 days. Just a bridge, she said. Family helps family, Daniel said. I transferred the money from our joint account. The invoice apparently took longer than expected. Then longer again. Then she stopped mentioning it. When I brought it up 6 months later, Patricia looked at me with genuine confusion, as though I had brought up something from a previous life. Daniel told me privately that asking again would embarrass her. So I stopped asking. I should have understood then what kind of transaction I had actually made. But I was still learning the language, sitting in that cold car. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I started listing every financial interaction I had with Patricia and Daniel's family since the wedding. It took me 40 minutes. The list was longer than I expected, and the total was not something I was ready to see. But I needed to see it. That is what I do. I find the leak. I calculate the cost of the spill. When I went back inside to get my coat, Daniel met me at the door. He looked more inconvenienced than concerned. His mother was upset. He said, I had embarrassed her in front of the family by refusing to sign and walking out. I asked him what I had been asked to sign. He said it was just paperwork to add me as a co-applicant on a business line of credit Patricia was applying for. Just to strengthen her application. Just routine. $75,000. I said, that is what the credit line was for. He said I was making it bigger than it was. I asked him why he did not tell me about it before Thanksgiving dinner. He said Patricia thought it would be easier to discuss in person, with family around. I looked at my husband in the hallway of our house in Hamilton, with his mother's perfume still faintly in the air. And I made a decision. I was not going to be loud about this. I was not going to cry or throw things or have the kind of fight that gets replayed at Christmas for years. I was going to be very, very quiet. And I was going to start digging. I said goodnight and went to our home office and closed the door. The first thing I did was pull our joint credit report. I had not checked it in almost a year. I told myself it was because I trusted Daniel. Really. I think I had not wanted to see what was there. It took me about 4 seconds to find it. There was a credit inquiry from 8 months ago, from a mortgage lender in Mississauga. Not for our home. We had not been looking at property. The inquiry was tied to my SIN number as a co-borrower on a residential mortgage application. An address in Burlington I did not recognize. I sat very still for a moment. Then I opened the land registry database I use for work and searched the address. A semi-detached house in Burlington. Purchased 11 months ago. The registered owners were Patricia and Renee. The mortgage on file listed a co-borrower. My name. I had never signed that application. I had never seen that address in my life. I had never agreed to co-sign a mortgage for my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Someone had. Though? Someone who had access to my personal information. My SIN. My income documents. My signature. I did not go wake up, Daniel. I understood something in that moment that took me a long time to accept. If he knew, he was complicit. If he didn't know, he had been so deliberately kept in the dark that his ignorance was its own kind of participation. Either way, I needed to move before I said a word to anyone in that family. I called my colleague Bridget at 7 the next morning. Bridget is a fraud investigator I have worked with on 3 insolvency files. She is meticulous, and she does not get excited. She asked me one question when I finished explaining. Did you sign anything at any point that could have been repurposed or altered? I thought back carefully. There was a document 2 years ago. A consent form Patricia asked me to sign so she could add me as an emergency contact on her business insurance. I signed it without reading it fully. Bridget was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send me everything you have. I will make some calls." 2 days later, Bridget called me back. She had run a fuller search. The Burlington property was not the only thing tied to my name. There was also a personal loan of $22,000 at a credit union in Brampton, taken out 14 months ago, with my information as the primary borrower. The funds had been deposited into a holding account connected to Patricia's staging business, which, according to the business filings Bridget pulled, had not had a paying client in over a year. The business was not slow. It was hollow. Patricia had been operating it as a vehicle to move borrowed money while keeping up the appearance of a working enterprise. She had a lease on an office in Oakville she never used, a website that had not been updated since 2021, business cards and a LinkedIn page, and zero revenue. The mortgage on the Burlington house had been in arrears for 4 months. The credit union loan had missed 2 payments. Both were about to report to the credit bureaus. When they did, my credit score would be destroyed. My ability to maintain my professional license could be affected. Everything I had built carefully for 10 years was 3 weeks from being burned to the ground by a woman who had looked me in the eye at my own wedding and said, "Welcome to the family." I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name is Anita, and she practices financial fraud and civil litigation out of a firm in downtown Toronto. I walked her through everything I had. She asked me several precise questions and then told me I had a strong case for identity fraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, and civil liability. She said the credit union file was potentially criminal. She told me to stop talking to Daniel until I had a strategy. Because if he was involved, anything I said at home could complicate the case. If he was not involved, he would panic and call his mother, which would also complicate the case. I asked her about the house in Burlington. She said the fraudulent mortgage application could trigger a CMHC flag and potentially a RCMP referral depending on the lender's compliance process. She said I should file a dispute with both credit bureaus immediately, formally disavow the loan at the credit union, and let her handle the next steps. I asked her how long it would take. She said, "Faster than you might think." Lenders cooperate quickly when they realize they may be holding fraudulent collateral. That night, I slept in the guest room. Daniel knocked once, and I told him through the door that I had a headache and needed quiet. He accepted that. He had always been good at accepting explanations that made things comfortable. Anita moved fast. Within a week, she had filed the formal identity fraud dispute with Equifax and TransUnion, submitted a complaint to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, and sent a letter to the credit union, triggering a fraud investigation on the personal loan. The credit union froze the account. The outstanding balance was tied to within 48 hours. That account, it turned out, was also connected to Patricia's business operating account. The freeze locked both. Patricia called Daniel 3 days later in a panic. I was in the next room, and I could hear his side of the conversation. He kept saying, "What do you mean, frozen? What account? What are you talking about?" He sounded genuinely confused. I still do not know for certain whether that was real. I have stopped needing to know. The lender on the Burlington mortgage launched their own internal fraud review when Anita's letter arrived. Standard procedure when a co-borrower on an active mortgage formally denies having signed the application. The review triggered a regulatory filing. The regulatory filing got picked up by a compliance officer who had a contact at the Ontario Securities Commission because Patricia, it turned out, had also been selling what she described as investment shares in her staging business to 4 private individuals, 2 of whom were family friends and 2 of whom were strangers she had met at a real estate networking event. There were no actual shares. There was no registered offering. There was a PDF she had made herself and a lot of confident conversation over dinner. That piece I had not found. The compliance officer found it. By the time Anita told me about the OSC involvement, I was sitting in her office in Toronto on a Tuesday afternoon in January. It was -18 outside. The light through the window was the flat gray that settles over the city in deep winter and makes everything look like a document. Anita slid a summary across the desk. I read it carefully. Identity fraud on 2 financial instruments. Fraudulent mortgage application. Unauthorized use of personal identification. Unregistered securities distribution to private investors. Potential breach of the Ontario Securities Act. Total financial exposure for Patricia significant. I asked about Renee, who is co-owner of the Burlington property. Anita said Renee's exposure depended on what she knew. That was a question for investigators, not for us. I asked about Daniel. Anita said the same thing. I had spent the previous 6 weeks sleeping in the guest room, going to work, and responding to Daniel's increasingly concerned questions with versions of, "I just need some space right now. I'm dealing with some work stress." He had accepted all of it. He had not pushed hard enough to find out what was actually happening. I did not know whether that was because he was guilty or because he was the kind of person who does not push when pushing might cost him something. I used to think those were different things. I am not sure anymore. The OSC investigation moved on its own timeline. Anita filed our civil claim in the Ontario Superior Court in February. Identity fraud. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Damages. Patricia was served at the Oakville office she never used. Renee was served at the Burlington house. I was told later that Patricia called the process server rude and asked him to come back at a better time. He did not. The credit union's fraud investigation concluded in March. They found sufficient evidence to refer the file to the police for a criminal investigation into fraud over $5,000 under the criminal code. In Canada, that carries a maximum of 14 years. The investigating officer called Anita to confirm she had been notified. He was professional and brief. He said the file was active. He did not say more than that. Patricia called me directly one afternoon in late March. I was in my car in the parking lot of a Loblaws in Hamilton, and her name came up on my screen. And I answered because Anita had told me it was fine to speak to her as long as I said nothing about the case and recorded the call, which I did. Patricia told me I was destroying the family. She said I was doing this because I had always resented her, because I had never really accepted Daniel as a partner, because I was a cold and ambitious woman who had never understood what it meant to prioritize family. She said Renee had a 2-year-old. She said the house was Renee's stability. She said I had everything, and they were only trying to take care of themselves. She said, "I made you part of this family. This is how you repay me." I listened to all of it. I had heard versions of this speech before. In my work, I have sat across from a lot of people who made catastrophic choices with other people's money, and then explained, at length, why the person asking questions was the real problem. The speech always has the same shape. The emotion is real. The accountability is not. When she finished, I said, Patricia, I can't discuss anything related to ongoing legal matters. I hope you're working with a lawyer. She hung up. I sat in the parking lot for another minute. Then I went inside and bought groceries for the week. I made a mental note of everything she had said and texted it to Anita when I got home. Daniel and I had the real conversation in April. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I had asked Anita if I could tell him. And she said at this point the civil filing was public record and it was reasonable to assume he was aware. I sat across from him at our kitchen table on a Saturday morning and I told him everything. Not in pieces. Not softened. All of it. The forged mortgage application, the fraudulent loan, the fake business shares, the police referral, the civil claim. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had not known about the mortgage. He said he had known about some of the money issues, but not the details. He said his mother had told him the credit line at Thanksgiving was routine and that I would understand once it was explained properly. He said he had believed her because she was his mother, and he had spent his whole life believing her because it was easier than the alternative. I looked at my husband across our kitchen table in the gray April light, and I thought about the word easier. I thought about how much of what had happened to me had been made possible by people choosing easier. Patricia chose easier than legitimate income. Daniel chose easier than difficult questions. Renee chose easier than asking where the down payment came from. And I, for 4 years, had chosen easier than seeing what was directly in front of me. I told him I needed him to speak to a lawyer of his own. Not Anita. Someone independent. Because I could not be the person who both protected myself legally and also guided him through what that meant for him. He nodded. He looked like someone who had just been handed a bill they had always known was coming, but had never looked at directly. We did not separate that day. I am not telling you that story. What I will tell you is that something shifted in that kitchen in a way that does not unshift. Some things you can renovate. Some things you have to rebuild from the foundation. We are still figuring out which one this is. The civil case reached a preliminary settlement conference in June. Patricia's lawyer, who had taken the case on what I suspect were generous payment terms, made an opening offer that was insultingly low. Anita declined it in 2 sentences. A counter was submitted. Patricia's available assets were limited because the Burlington property had been flagged by the court and the business accounts remained frozen. The negotiation was not really a negotiation. It was a calculation. Anita is very good at calculations. The Burlington house was eventually sold under an order of the court. The proceeds went first to the mortgage lender, who had been made whole through a separate claim process, and then to the settlement. Renee moved into a rental in Mississauga with her daughter. Patricia moved into a condo she shares with a friend in Brampton. The Oakville office lease was terminated. The LinkedIn page is still up. The criminal investigation is ongoing as of when I am recording this. I cannot say more than that. What I can tell you is this. I drove back to Hamilton from Anita's office one evening in late spring, after one of the last case meetings before the settlement, and I took the QEW along the lake because I wanted the light. Lake Ontario in the evening in May is a specific kind of beautiful, that flat silver blue that looks like it goes on forever. And I drove along it with the window down a little and thought about what I had lost and what I had kept. I had kept my credit, my license, my professional standing, my name, legally and professionally, intact. I had kept the work I built while nobody was watching. While I was paying quietly into a system that was designed to consume me, I had kept my ability to walk into a room and be taken seriously, which is not nothing, which is in fact everything. When you understand how hard it is to rebuild, once that is gone, I had lost 4 years of margin. Money I will not see again except through the settlement. Time I spent managing a version of my life that was not the one I actually had. A version of my marriage that was easier than the true one. A mother-in-law I had, on some level, genuinely tried to love. And I had lost the part of myself that believed people who say, "Welcome to the family," without being able to tell you exactly what that costs. I pulled off the highway when I got to Hamilton and stopped at a Tim Hortons on the way home. I sat in the drive-thru and ordered a medium coffee. Double double, which is the most Canadian sentence I know how to say. I paid with my own card, my own money, my own clean credit file. I drove home and I made dinner, and I did not call Patricia. I did not call Renee. I thought about it, and then I did not. I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I opened my laptop, and I started the week's files. There is always more work. There are always more people who have made financial disasters and need someone to come in, find the leaks, calculate the damage, and help them figure out what is salvageable. I am very good at it. If you have ever had someone hand you the bill for a life they were living on your name, drop the word receipt in the comments. And share this if you believe your financial safety is worth protecting, even when the person threatening it calls herself family.